I was speaking with a young couple at the recent gathering that I went to in Tennessee in the mountains, where I love, where I've been several times now for various celebrations of changing of seasons and what have you. And as you may know, I am often given to the esoteric, ethereal kind of thoughts, and I said, you know, a lot of people talk about how wonderful it is to be alive and this and that, and just how wonderful it is to be here. And I said maybe where we came from or where we're going is better than where we are now. Well, I realize that can be a dangerous sort of belief as it regards certain aspects of religion, because if you're convinced that to one extreme or the other, that this life is just a test or training ground, you can become unbalanced and in the way of only dwelling on kind of the thought of an afterlife and not accomplishing, moving things forward here to the extent that you might be able to. And I struggle with that. I have become much more attached to Buddhism and Hinduism and those sorts of well, they're not a philosophy, they're not a science, as Alan Watts says, but I kind of get the more and more feeling that the spiritual warfare, some people might have a problem with that word. If so, please do. But the spiritual warfare that we either avoid or live in every day, how do we deal with that? There will be no definitive end of the world. We are already being not even so soft-killed, as I have mentioned many times. The food, the water, the air, the cleaning products, etc. I do not have access to any good graphics or a switcher beyond a simple video editor at this time. I started doing the all health and science thing, and I'm still going to do some of those, but it's very hard to become noticed on the internet, especially in my case, because the last YouTube channel was doing very well, and due to my own fault, that came to an end, even though they should have given me a little bit of a break, because one of the strikes against me was going to be taken away because Warner Brothers didn't like my video of Eric Clapton getting as many views as theirs were. And you know, if you could just have access back to that channel, or whatever the equivalent of that kind of thing would be to you, just long enough to get your stuff back, and you know, use the ones that weren't a violation, although they tell you right there in the fine print that they can change the rules basically at any time. And that kind of ties together again with my feeling and desire and thrust for something new. None of the old things are kind of working the way they did, which I suppose is as it should be, because as you get older and hopefully wiser and practicing a healthy lifestyle, etc., your interests and perspectives and everything are going to be changing and evolving. And so while that's a good thing, it's also can be a bit of a struggle, because I know many of us want to be the best person that we can be, and to not just be spinning our wheels, but to be contributing something. And the funny thing is that as isolated and lonely as I have felt at previous times, I feel even more so now because of the information that I've mentioned many times from wellaware1.com. All of this craziness in the news is all a production, and I can't pretend like I don't know that, and therefore it cuts me off from a vast majority of the internet, as far as I can tell, as far as finding valuable intellectual conversations. I deleted one person today because I had already showed them some of the information, and they seemed to accept it. And then recently they were talking about the Charleston church shooting hoax as if it really happened, and saying, and I mean, I can't be too hard on these people, because I was just like that some time ago. That's how the whole thing is designed. And at one time, I remember back when I started a MySpace profile, I believe it was where I said I can't even believe I said this now, but I said I love politics. Because in my mind, it was somewhat of a fair two-party system, even though I knew there was a lot of financial corruption. I didn't have any idea what we were really faced with. And I am very convinced that to the extent that we can win, it's not going to be by trying to do anything with the existing political system, except for the ones where we're fighting for our lives, where we don't have any choice. And I'm talking about GMOs and Roundup and glyphosate. And I don't even have time for people anymore that I have to explain that stuff to. I mean, some of the stuff has been, and I realize everybody doesn't see the same thing, but if you're still just going to the grocery store and grabbing anything off the shelf and watching news at night, even though they reveal to you what they are, with the Brian Williams situation and countless other things like that. The Matrix, although it has been going on for, well, I'll just keep it in decades that I'm somewhat familiar with, which would be the 1800s to the present, being that I am a vampire. This is really out of the ordinary, but I'm kind of all over the place, and I know that's why you don't tune in. I have 0.5 listeners. But something happened to a neighbor's animal, and I couldn't help but thinking how that was a physical manifestation of a spiritual rottedness, for lack of a better word. And it made me think about, kind of related to that expression, the dumb expression about if God closes a window, But if we close a window on an aspect of our consciousness and soul, such as true spirituality, which by that I mean not going through motions, such as just showing up at things and attendance and all of that sort of thing. I'm talking about whether it's real or not. It doesn't matter what anyone believes. Atheists are some of the most spiritual people that I know. Ricky Gervais being a perfect example, and maybe spiritual isn't the right word, but it's the closest thing I know to what I'm trying to say. And I realize it's kind of a contradiction in a way that I think so much about Ricky Gervais, and that he's such a genius and a wonderful person, but yet he's worked with many of these people in from his country and from our country, America. It's that have perpetuated this system of scandal, tragedy, politics, etc. So that is what it is. Another thing. Let me get back to the. What happened was this lady's dog, which she has had for a number of years, and it killed their cat, which they called it their cat, but it was just a cat that they kind of watched out for, and like they would let it come in the garage and eat, like they never really took it in. But evidently it got in the back fence, which I'm sure this wasn't the first time. But anyway, that was the story, that this domesticated dog killed the cat, and I've personally never heard of that before. I'm sure it probably goes on, but this is a woman whose husband was kicked out 6 or so years ago because he was exposing himself to anybody and a woman that was around, including this woman's own mother. And I have no doubt that he did damage to the girls, the two daughters, when they were growing up. One of them is a lesbian, which is not to say that that's always a reaction to childhood. I have nothing against homosexuality at all, and that's not necessarily what might have caused this girl to go that way. But the other girl never really had a date in high school, and has gone from whatever her average weight of around 120 or something to well over 200 pounds. And whether anybody likes to hear it or not, when you have that much of an imbalance, it's a manifestation of a sickness. And that could be, for some people that could be makeup, for some people that could be their vehicle, for some people that could be the way they look at other people, just because they're a little bit different from them. It's kind of like everybody's fighting something, but some of us are working on getting better to the best of our ability. I think that was the gist of what I was trying to get across about this person that I heard that news about. Oh yes, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, kind of related to the internet and podcasts, and There was this one guy whose name I won't mention again that I thought a good bit of for the information that he was getting across about philosophy, because it was somewhat a new topic for me and not something that I will stop learning about and pursuing. That's my dog, if you can hear that breathing. But I went ahead and turned that one off the subscribe list, because he regularly does these so-called news and true news items, and talks about these things that somehow people idiotically think are happening this close together and just happen to be happening, so close together and whatnot. But he talks about the perpetrators and what have you as if they were real people, and goes along with all the false made up stories about them, and in kind of the same way the Bible says you can't serve two masters. You can't be giving thirsty people water and putting like one of those tanning bed lights on them at the same time. It's kind of like what I see this person as doing. And as always, thank you for listening, and I will be back when I am back.